We acknowledge the Ancient Ones, the Greater Shamanic Council of Light, Hermes, both Trismegistus and Seshet, Lady of the Measuring Cord, as above, so below, as within, so without. We acknowledge Imhotep, architect of the cosmos. May the earth be the mirror of heaven. We acknowledge the sacred order of the Magi, and all throughout history who knew, like now, a turning of the ages. We acknowledge the master builders of Göbekli Tepe and the great shining ones at Cayelin, the courage and knowledge of the Polynesian wayfinders traversing the great oceans. We acknowledge the prophetic traditions of Ezekiel and Daniel, the traditions of Avalon, the Merlin, and the Round Table, the calendric wizardry of the Maya, and the Venus teachings from Mesoamerica, the Jupiter teachings originating in China, and the Vedic lunar mansion traditions, the Babylonian and Sumerian sidereal zodiacs, the brilliant Hellenistic invention of the seasonal zodiac. The Neolithic peoples around the planet, some still today, honoring the sacred connection between the land and the sky. The Tuatha De Danann in Ireland, who created a time of 2,000 years of peace, the builders of Newgrange. My teachers that are not in human form, Mount Shasta, the Grandfather Rock at the Wonderland of Rocks in Joshua Tree, Mount Haleakala on Maui, the Fish Lake Valley, Hierophany, and the sacred landscapes around the planet, the astrosophy of Rudolf Steiner, and the esoteric astrology of DK in the Tibetan, both presaging the shamanic astrology paradigm, and particularly the archetypal visions of C.G. Jung and the cosmology of my mentor, Dane Rajar. For these and more, we give thanks.
Welcome to this episode of the Further Adventures of Shamanic Astrology. We are focusing today on the unrecognized assumptions with language used by astrologers and nearly everyone else, and also other pertinent issues. I am Cayelin Castell, co-founder of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, here with Erik Roth, the managing director of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, and Daniel Giamario, who is the founder of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. So, Daniel, we're going to start out by looking at language here. And so one of the things that I've always loved about Shamanic Astrology is how we've been finding ways to re-language things, so that the terms that sound kind of judgmental or negative, we can find other ways of speaking to it. So can you share more with us about that?
Yeah, sure, definitely. This has been on my mind for a long time as I encountered the languaging in the mainstream approach or in traditional astrology. I've always felt that much of what has been in traditional astrology or mainstream astrology is an artifact of the time that is locked at a particular time period in history where things were more dualistic. And in fact, more like binary, or, good or bad, black and white, and so on. And I wanted to cover a little bit regarding first here in some of the words that we use and that we're trying to retrain ourselves and to not fall into the trap. Because as most people who've investigated shamanic astrology at all know, we try to avoid things that create that split in the mind of good and bad, right and wrong, like that. And so actually, we can just start with the word opposition. And as you know, in this system, when we look at polarities, like what are called oppositions, like Aries, Libra, Taurus, Scorpio, and so on. They're considered to be oppositions, but actually, in my own experience, there is more in common than not. So they work together as a team, and so the word opposition actually makes no sense. I can remember my first kinesthetic experience of this. I went on a camping trip with my brother in 1979, and it was under a full moon. And I went on the top of the hill. My brother wanted to camp down under the trees, right? And I wanted to go to the top of the hill. And I saw the instant of the moon rising and the sun setting. And I felt in my body what is called the opposition. They weren't opposed, they weren't against each other. They were working together. It was I could actually feel the resonance of the two bodies, and so that was kind of the very first insight I got to be concerned about that word opposition. And you can look up the etymology on these things, you know, and you can see what the popular understanding means to be against something. You know, that's the opposition. So I like to use the expression resonant polarity rather than opposition.
So, and when we define that astrological aspect, we're going to be using that term resonant polarity.
I do that as often as I can remember. Yeah.
We still sometimes call it an opposition.
We fall into that trap over and over again. Yeah.
It's kind of conditioned.
Right, strongly.
And then, of course, we get to this word rulerships. I'm kind of a rascal sometimes, you know, and I've talked to a number of evolutionary astrologers, and I say, well, how evolutionary are you? You still use rulerships. And you know, the word ruler originally comes from the ruler, to draw a straight line, to keep things in line. And then it actually became the other connotation, you know, like the command of something else. You know, you rule over something. So even Dane Rajar, my mentor, had much to say against rulerships. He felt that rulerships was part of a closed system, and that if you really look at the relationship between signs and planets, it makes absolutely no sense. And I can, you know, actually show you the documentation on that. But we don't. He goes on and on about how illogical it is to make to put the Uranus with Aquarius and because then actually the next one should be ruled by Aries. You know, so that essentially it's trying to fit in a logic that was in a closed system when you bring in bodies that have a completely different, they're not even part of that system. You know, so he also is opposed to higher octave understandings. You know, like some astrologers think that you have Mercury, Venus, and Mars, and then Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are the higher octave of those three. Completely debunks that whole understanding, and I've always felt that way.
In a way, it almost implies that something is lesser and something is more.
Right.
And so what we're really wanting to look at is how is it more on what is its value in and of itself as not being less or more.
Right.
And also, if you think about rulerships, it would imply that the planet in that sign is somehow more in its rulership, rather than, what we really do with Shamanic Astrology is look at it as its resonant sign. Like, what does it resonate most with? Where's its favorite place to be? But it is valued and valuable in every single sign.
In every one. It has its own value in each one. There's no better. I certainly experienced this big time in my life when I knew these two women with Venus in Taurus and Mars in Aries. And man, they thought they were special. But I'm sorry, they had every bit as much challenges and difficulty as anyone else, you know, and so they wore that as a badge of honor, and it's an example of a certain kind of programming, I guess you could say. So anyway, no rulerships in this system. Then actually related terms, I'm going to actually jump down to exaltation, debilitation, detriment. Exaltation, meaning state of supreme happiness, higher rank. Again, here we have this ranking system. Debilitation, weak. These are the this is actually in astrological dictionaries, okay? Debilitation, weak, and causes many challenges and difficulties in the life of the native. This is not helpful. So, and actually, I wanted to say that there will be actually a resource page when this goes up. But there are sources for what I'm sharing. There's a not well known today, actually sidereal astrologer, not Vedic, named Cyril Fagan. He used to live in the Tucson area, actually. And he did this remarkable research regarding the origin of exaltations and detriments. And he was able to locate a date in history when those were the exact positions. And so actually the whole doctrine comes from about 700 BC. And then it's locked in, as if that reality of that particular day is supposed to now carry over to now. So I'm just very skeptical of that because of that, but also because it's ranking things in a way that is not useful today.
Does that come from the Babylonians?
Yes, actually, from the Babylonians. Yeah, with who originated the sidereal zodiac.
Right.
With Antares and Aldebaran as the prime fiducials for that zodiac. More of it. That's one of the things we discuss a lot in the cosmology workshop. And then related terms: malefic and benefic. So we got some good planets and we got some bad planets, huh? Malefic means bad doer. Benefic means kindly, and it comes from the Greek word meaning good doer. So, oh wow, gee, some of them are planets of our friends and some of them are our enemies. How that kind of goes along, doesn't it, with the, you gotta have an enemy, it's gotta be dualistic, good and bad, So we kind of threw that one, we throw those out.
Well, and if we're looking at it as everything is here to be supportive to our evolutionary path, we don't want to make a judgment that something is good and something is bad. We want to see it all as being supportive to our life's journey.
And it doesn't help because it doesn't help us in a way to help navigate through that.
Right.
It just it assigns a judgment and you're stuck in it.
Yeah.
I remember when I was told I had a debilitated moon by a Vedic astrologer, and I was like, that does not sound good.
Mine is more debilitated than yours. Capricorn moon.
But it's like, how do you live with that? That's not helpful.
Just like being told you're in a 19-year Saturn cycle,
Right.
But anyway, I've had to repair a lot of damage from people that have been have their awareness impacted by that. And then some words that are less often used, the inferior superior thing, which is used with the planets, the Venus and Mercury. And I actually took the lead from the astrosophy school, the Steiner school, to rename it interior and exterior. Because I'm sorry, when I hear the word superior, it sounds, the other connotation comes in, better than, and the other one is less good, when in fact the inferior one, so-called, the interior one is where the whole mutation happens into a different archetype.
Meaning interior, meaning it's between the Earth and the Sun, so it's in the interior between there. And then the exterior is when it's on the other side of the Sun.
Right.
So it's conjunct the Sun, but from the Earth's perspective, it's like far, far away.
Yeah, virtually every derivation of those words it definitely involves ranking. And when you hear the word superior, that something comes into your mind. When you hear inferior, something else comes into your mind.
But only with interior do we get to see the inner planet Venus and Mercury pass across the face of the Sun,
Yes.
between the Earth and the Sun. And to call that inferior would not apply very well.
No, but we didn't. I did not invent that. I just appropriated that from the Steiner, from astrosophy.
Right.
Because they look at the stars. They're another star-based system. And then let's see. Then I put the word hard into our conversation, and another one we could have put in is heavy. And I this has applying to aspects, and I've fallen into this trap. You got heavy Pluto, you got hard Pluto, right? And we're doing our best to try to reframe the language there and call it dynamic Pluto, dynamic Saturn, which is then taking the, because it is actional, it's clearly actional, but not given the flavor that sounds oppressive.
And really the dynamic part of it is it's taking us to a place of, especially if we're looking at Pluto, to a place of empowerment when we are able to engage the intention of that planet. And with any planet, whatever planet it might be. So
Yeah.
hard implies maybe it's not even possible. And dynamic implies something that's like, oh, we can engage this and have a better experience as a result.
Indeed. And then one of these, the last word on the list is one that we created together. In the cosmology work, we talk a lot about the galactic center. Galactic center. The astronomers call the opposite point, when you look out into deep space, the anti-center. And I don't know, I just hated saying galactic anti-center. So we decided to use the word edge. So you have the galactic center and you have the galactic edge, because that is exactly what's happening. When you look to the opposite of the galactic center, you're looking toward the galactic edge. So that's another thing we changed. I think while we're talking about words, I want to, this is going to come up later in our conversation, if I can find my notes here, having to do with the word divination. Now this came up in one of our calls, where it occurred to me, I called our card deck the divination card deck. And I've made this really big deal about how this is not a predictive system. And lo and behold, I discovered that when you look in the dictionary, definition number 1 for divination is fortune telling, telling the future. I said, oh my God, well that's not how I'm using it. Definition number 2, a way of gaining intuitive awareness, a means of perceiving through the intuition in amazing ways, something like that. So that's how I'm using it, not as predicting the future. But we're going to be talking about the whole prediction issue a little bit later here. I'm thinking that is the main number. Those are the words I wanted to discuss. So let's, what else would you like to talk about?
So Daniel, do we live in the fallen realm? Fallen realm. So involution and evolution, we live in a paradigm which really defines that we're here in a realm that should go up and out into the heavens.
We fell from grace.
We fell from grace, looking especially in the Judeo-Christian doctrine.
And Gnosticism and theocratic Buddhism and I like to discuss this. And actually, I want to give a big thumbs up to Robert Hand's work on this, because he was the first of the Western astrologers that really tried to bring this to the attention of modern astrologers. That in Neoplatonic theory, in Hellenistic astrology, in all the astrology that grew up around the beginning of the Christian era, in Gnosticism and when all that was happening, they considered this place we're in here to be a fallen realm. And that you could use astrology to ascend, to go to the higher realms, to the angelic realms, to leave this place, the place of the archons, the place of like we're damned being here and we need to go up and out. And actually, Robert Hand was trying to show that actually that was there was another view that astrology actually includes the alchemy of bringing spirit into matter, and the magical tradition in alchemy recognizes that. And then I realized that was really a principle of shamanism also, that we value the entirety of the human experience. And this was borne out tremendously by something I heard that the Dalai Lama did. The Dalai Lama convened this convention where he decided he would elevate Tibetan Bun shamanism to be the same level of importance as the three theocratic schools of Buddhism. This was really radical on his part, and in fact it outraged the theocratic Buddhists. And the reason is that in theocratic Buddhism, the prayers are, how do we get off the wheel? We've got to get off the wheel. While in Tibetan Bun shamanism, I pray for thousands of lifetimes. This is where it's happening, So it's this journey of involution into form, bringing spirit into matter. And in the Eastern tradition, that's also the belief of Sri Aurobindo. And Kadia and some of the other people in the school are always pushing the involution thing. And that's why, as a principle in shamanic astrology, we give equality to evolution and involution. And that showed up also in our discussion about the masculine and the feminine. So we're not trying to get out of this place. Actually, we're trying to be more conscious in this place, to bring more awareness into this level of density. And so I think it's an extremely important issue that differentiates this kind of astrology. I know there are others that may agree with what I'm describing, but there's built into many of the astrological systems is this view that there's something higher.
That reminds me of Danielle and I both have a transcendental meditation background, and I heard Charlie Luke speak in the 70s, and he said that there are higher level beings, gods, whatever you want to call them, gods, goddesses, who are waiting to come here, because that you cannot have the evolutionary experience. I don't know if evolutionary would be the right word, but you cannot get the experience you have here anywhere else.
Right.
And so to be here and to be in a human body is a huge gift.
So they're all lining up, waiting there, taking a number and waiting to drop in to be with us.
And in my own experience with my first wife, I mean, her number came up in order to try to be human, but it was too hard, She didn't. She had to go back to being an angel. We already covered some of the other issues that we're going to originally go into the show, like regarding assumptions about gender and sex. So that won't be covered here. Overuse of sun signs, won't be in this discussion now. The hierarchical and patriarchal basis of modern astrology we've looked at deeply. But there's several other issues here that we wanted to discuss.
Yeah, Daniel, so a lot of people who are astrologers or who are into astrology or who even come for astrology readings are, they look at it as predictive. Like, tell me what's going to happen. Am I going to get married? Am I going to get a new job? Am I going to move? They want to know the predictive aspect of it. And one of the things I love about shamanic astrology is that it's not coming from this place of being predictive, but rather choosing to engage these mysteries as a form of divination. And so we talked a little bit about divination already, but can you tell us more about why that is?
The article that I wrote about is it's not predictive. It's actually based upon an idea that I think I'm going to start with the highest level view of this, and it's an insight that came from my work with the Diamond Heart work in the Ridwan School, and the understanding in that is that it really is exactly the same as the Emerald Tablets. It's that here we are in the one thing. We're in the one thing. In Hinduism, it's what they mean when they say, I am that, thou art that, all this is that, which is quite a intense statement, actually. The one. So in the one thing, there are essences. So there's like a plan. There's an energy to it. There's love in it. There's different essential qualities that are in the one thing. There is nothing outside of it. Everything, including the best astrologer in the world, is in the one thing. Now, maybe some of you know about the Enneagram in the audience. And I've noticed that most people that are into astrology tend to relate to the number 7. The holy, which is called by Almas, the holy plan. So in other words, the one thing does have a plan to it. So it unfolds in a certain way, it expands and contracts, and it has a particular way that it operates, right? Geez, if you're an astrologer, you love to get close to that plan. Whoa, to get close to how that one thing is moving and changing and its pattern, the pattern is just the turn on, right?
You mean like the gears of the universe, the gears of creation itself?
Yeah. It's what a turn on to get close to it. But the astrologer, even the greatest astrologer on the planet, is in the one thing also and cannot see from the outside. Meaning there is no such thing as objective time. Objective time doesn't exist. And this eliminates the possibility of prediction. I mean, Robert Hand brought this up too. You could prove something 100 years ago. That doesn't necessarily mean you can prove it today. The unfoldment is such that the astrologer is contained in the one thing, and it's very tricky because it's an exhilaration to get close to those gears. The way I like to look at it is not the gears, but like looking under the skirt of that one woman, and you can get close to the holy place. That one woman, meaning, of course,
Great
our
mystery.
great mother, the
mother.
female aspect of great mystery, right? It's exhilarating to get close to it, but we must not ever fall into the trap that we really know what's going to happen. We can't. So actually then what is astrology then? It's actually a divination. And so basically at the moment of birth, you basically have this set of, you have the mandala, and it's showing you the truth of that particular instant. Every time you do a reading is another divination. Even the transits, you can read in a book what the transit is supposed to mean. You sit with a person in a reading and you have some knowledge of the transit. It's happening at a certain time, but you sit with that person, a soul-to-soul encounter, and something magical happens.
It's true.
Never the same way once. Now you can get probabilities. I mean, I'm a Capricorn moon, and I tell people that I'm generally pretty good at reading stuff because why? 20,000 charts. I've seen it happen. 9 out of 10 times a certain way, and you can say, well, I've seen it happen this way. And it's likely that you have to be prepared for this or that, but you cannot predict that's what's going to happen. And in that moment, even of that soul-to-soul encounter, reality changes. It's like it's a principle of quantum mechanics. The awareness of two people together changes what the material reality is.
There's another author, a book you recommend called Cycles of Becoming, that also talks about that.
Well, the master text on this is by Jeffrey Cornelius, called The Moment of Astrology, which is just astounding, mind-blowing thing to give you a foundation for what it is I'm talking about here. So just to finish these thoughts regarding prediction, I think that the approach that Shamanic Astrology takes is it turns prediction upside down. So if you're able to tune into intent, what the intent of a timing is, what the intent of a birth chart is, then your engagement with that is more likely to reach a certain destination, as opposed to taking that out of a person's hands and predicting that there's going to be something that's going to happen. That's actually one of the main reasons why so many people in the West debunk astrology. Which is basically like, I'm at the, born under a bad sign, or at the effect of some negative thing that has been put into their head. No good or bad, no right or wrong. There's only the engagement with the nature of the intent of that timing.
The other thing that is often not considered is how that person is going to engage it. They have a choice around that. And sometimes people will not do whatever they need to do in order to get to where it is they want to go. They just hope it'll happen to them. And I mean, we can't predict that, one. Two, so I remember I've read for some people in the past, and they've said, well, am I going to have a relationship? And I would say, you're in a cycle where it looks like that could happen for you if you're ready and if you're in a place for that. And then later they go, well, I went through the cycle and I didn't get a relationship. And I'm like, I didn't say you would. I said you would if you were, and that was your intent and you were showing up for that. So that's the other piece of it. Like it could be a great timing for something, for a person to make a big change in their life or whatever. But if they're not making the change, it's not going to happen.
Or sometimes you share the intent with a client and they write back to you and say, oh, your prediction came true. And I'm thinking, no, I didn't predict anything.
I was tuning you into your intent.
And to the possibility.
In a certain time frame.
The potentiality, the opportunity.
Yeah, and what makes astrology, I discussed this in the Origins book, that what makes astrology the superior, I'll use the word in its correct form now, a superior system of divination, is because it takes into many more factors than tarot. Or in other words, there's timings in it, and there's a certain place, a certain time. So basically there's many, many more parameters associated with an astrological divination than other systems. It's not putting down other forms, but it's just showing why astrology is called the highest of the lower mysteries. The highest of the lower mysteries. I've shared that in astrology conferences before. People, what does that mean? The highest of the lower mysteries?
Then what would be the lowest of the highest mysteries?
Economics? I don't know. Nobody's asked me that question. So usually the question is, what are the higher mysteries?
Yes.
Well, things like, so how does self-realization happen? What is the nature of grace? If you know anything about grace, you don't earn it. It's bestowed in mysterious ways. Or how does self-love actually really happen? These are some of the astrology can point you in a direction that can help, but no, those are the higher mysteries. But in the ancient days, astrology included all the other, quote, sciences. Everything was in the umbrella of astrology. So we'll go the highest and the lower mysteries. Okay, I think, is that good? Right?
Yeah, that's really good.
And by the way, there are, the mic is available if anybody wants to ask questions.
We have one more.
Before we open it up? Well, I'm saying we could have opened it up before too. But,
Okay, well there was one more.
Two more.
Well, two more. All right.
I got the last one.
All right, so if astrology isn't for prediction, which a lot of people think it is out there in the world, why are we doing it? What is the attraction here? More specifically about astrology.
I've shared this with a few people recently that I actually felt a lot of grief at what the ebbs and flows of the astrology world have been. And in the 70s, the leading edge You know, the avant-garde astrologers, the ones that were leading the astrological renaissance at that point, were very soul-centered. Everybody agreed it was not about prediction. And they were actually bringing spiritual paths, esoteric thought, but depth psychology primarily into it. And it was really soul-making, for the purpose of soul-making. Another way of putting it is assist a person in becoming everything they can be, achieving self-actualization, fulfilling their original intent, being in touch with their purpose, things like that. It had nothing whatsoever to do with, you know, how do I find the right chick? You know, I mean, or how do I make the most amount of money? Those questions were almost never asked. And then I noticed in the 80s and the 90s, the whole thing, people that were like at that leading edge of soul-making versions of astrology started going into Hellenistic or medieval or the most deterministic version of Vedic astrology. Now, I know people that do those types of astrology that are soul-centered, without question. But I mean, so my intention is not to denigrate other systems, but rather looking at whether or not this commitment to the unfoldment of the soul, commitment to being our full self, to be an authentic human being, not to just figure out how to fit into some groove or to be, quote, normal.
Or make a lot of money, or be successful at something, or have a lot of power.
Right.
Yeah.
And as I write in my book, I first got the insight about this when I noticed in the 60s that the ethic in the late 60s was, and I'm paraphrasing, this is how I saw it, be your archetype. Be your archetype. And then I noticed that there wasn't a lot of knowledge about the full spectrum of all the archetypes. You know, so therefore, this type of astrology started to become. This was before Shamanic Astrology. I mean, this was in what was called transpersonal astrology, or what Rudyard led was the leading edge of. And then along came the mythologists, you know, the Demetra Georges and the Tony Josephs and the Richard Eidman, and you know, these individuals that were bringing that out in a huge way in the culture. And it backtracked. It backtracked. I mean, there are exceptions, but and it's just like that's not the main thing going on now. This is one astrologer who actually wrote a phenomenal book about the journey of the soul in 1970. By 79, he debunked the whole thing and is now just a well-known financial astrologer. So, I mean, that's what's his path. But I'm just saying, from the perspective of the overall astrological community, I mean, it broke my heart, because it looked. I was under this assumption that basically was going to keep unfolding in that direction. That was before I knew about the fourth turning. Before I knew about cycles of history, that you know that particular way of looking at things was part of a generation and not like some linear progress.
Ooh, progress. Are we ready to talk about that?
Yeah, that led right into that, didn't it?
Nice
Yes,
little
it
segue
did.
there.
Right? So the final question for you tonight, Daniel, is on the myth of progress.
Yes.
So I'm imagining that what you're going to share with us is going to expand the perception of those who are listening. And, you know, so why is there a myth of progress, and what's that all about?
Why is there? Well, it's basically that view in science, and a peculiar Western view, that you know, like even in the late 1800s, it was actually written in the encyclopedias that within 5 years we'll know everything we need to know. that basically everything had been figured out, and it was all through scientism. You know, that using the approach of science to know everything. And so this linear thing that starts from, you know, caveman and barbaric humans, and then you develop some technology, and then we become uplifted into a superior species, this kind of thing. And the astrological world, the mythological world doesn't work that way. It cycles, cycling around, you know. And even in my own research, I used to be a philosophy major and studied Chinese history, right? And there's an ebb and flow in 5,000 years of Chinese civilization, where there would be 500 years that was scientism, objective, and then it would go back into subjectivity, and you would have everything being correspondence. You know, so you have a word that could mean, you know, like lead equals Saturn equals ego. I mean, basically, a word would have all of these correlations as the universe is correspondence. You know, like a hologram. And then that would shift around, and then it would go back to, well, no, that's just superstition, and now we'll just measure everything, and everything becomes objective, and you know, so it cycles around, and we're in that time period again right now. Yeah. And then there will always be a reaction against that, and it'll go back to a different view. So, I mean, to me, this is also borne out by the cycles of the precessional cycles, and also the yugas. And the most recent research about the yugas, finally putting all of that research together, of many different interpretations of the yuga system, is that the very bottom of the pendulum of the Kali Yuga is 2024.
So before you go further with that, could you just explain to people who might not know what a yuga is, what a yuga is?
Well, it's one way of defining periods of time, and in that system, which the Greeks borrowed from India, is you have a golden age, a silver age, and a bronze age, and an iron age. Sometimes they would shift the metals around a little bit, but it was 4 of them. So in the golden age, the entirety of the human heart was available. In the next age, 3/4 of the human heart was available. In the next one, only half of the human heart is available. And in the Kali Yuga, only 1/4 of the human heart is available. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have an open heart in the Kali Yuga. It's just that it's a much greater achievement, really, to have an open heart in the Kali Yuga. In the golden age, everybody does. What, you know, it's the average
kind of a
situation. Yeah. And so that, to me, I don't think there's been linear progress. That maybe in certain areas. And the more we research, the more we go into what was happening more than 5,000 years ago. It wasn't barbarism. It was Cayelin. It was cooperation. Of course, it was a much less population, and they had a different way of life. Far more leisure time than we do.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I have my doubts about this whole progress thing, you know. I think it's an ebb and flow. It goes up and it goes down, it goes around and around. And it's based upon what constellational group is in alignment with which sign.
And so the end of the Kali Yuga, and that's the yuga that has only 1/4 of the heart available. So if you are able to achieve an open heart in that time period, which we've been in for the last couple thousand years or so, that's a huge accomplishment. But and you were saying that in 2024, it looks like that
That's
yuga is coming to an end, and then
Well, then just slowly starts going up. Yeah.
Start ascending back, so we'll get another 1/4 of the heart, and then we'll get another 1/4 on like that. Right?
But is that 2024? That's the end of the Kali Yuga cycle period.
The bottom of it.
The bottom of it. So it's still going on, but it's just that's the sort of the trenches, and now we're ascending, or moving upwards.
Right. And then it's interesting that corresponds to the very date that the book, The Fourth Turning, is the end of the American Seikyong.
And the time when Pluto moves into Aquarius.
And when the gathering, first of all, the massing of planets in Capricorn, right? And an example that I could give of this is that even if you look at archaeology, in Egypt, in Peru, in the Olmec Mayan civilization, in rock art, the older it is, the more complex and beautiful it is. The 10,000-year-old rock art in Arizona, down at Sears Point, is this complex, abstract stuff. And then you get to the stuff from 200 years ago, and it's these crude pictographs. The megalithic wonders of these countries that I listed, the older stuff is far more incredible than the stuff that came later. Another example is languages. The older languages, the ones that are dying out, are far more complicated and complex as far as human interaction than the ones we use now. And look what's happening with language now. Text language. I mean, it's like some future person looking back on it, and they looked at language. Who would they say are the evolved ones?
BTW. We're less evolved, language-wise.
And then also about, you can go on and on about that regarding war, regarding money and all of that. I mean, you call that evolution? Anyway, that's, and the last point on it would be another, for me, another point that talks more about devolution than evolution, although it's really about cycles. Originally, the people who are the hierarchical elite, the people who are respected and protected, were the ones that had spiritual initiation, were the ones that had philosophical training, the ones that had knowledge of the higher mysteries. You couldn't be a king without that. And now, what does it take?
Big army.
A large bank account.
A big bank account and a big army.
I call that devolution, actually.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. So I think we cover. Oh, let's see if there.
Yeah.
Got
So
some
anybody
comments
have
and
any
questions.
comments, questions, insights?
That camera there. Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
When you talk about a planet hitting, a transit's going to hit your angle, isn't hit rather hard? Or heavy?
Yes.
Excellent question.
Yes.
Excellent question.
Write it down. Yeah, that's excellent indeed. Shall we say intersect?
Transit over.
Activate.
Activate.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Hey, write that down.
Thank you.
We already starting to use the word activate, actually.
Hit.
I got hit. I got hit by the Saturn within.
All right, I've got a great word from traditional astrology that I just learned recently. Anoretic. When it's
Anoretic?
anoretic, and I was just looking it up. It's only in astrology world, you can't use it in Scrabble. And but astrologers use it all the time. And I know it now because Uranus is in 29 degrees Aries, and 29 degrees, if a planet is in a 29 degrees, it's anoretic. And it's the words they associated with, you wouldn't believe that it doesn't it just sound terrible, anoretic. It's on its last legs, it's just really a terrible place to be.
Or
You're in trouble if your sun is in 29.
Wow.
Yeah, so you haven't even heard anoretic, this is good.
No,
That's great.
but you're proving my point here.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, okay. And then there's a really good word I've heard in astrology too that I love, Kazini. And Lene Van Horn talks about this all the time.
Kazemi.
Kazini.
Yeah.
It's when your two planets are conjunct exactly.
When the sun
Well,
is
it's being used a lot. You know, after I wrote those papers on the synodic cycles, and I developed the concept of a planet going into the underworld, then it was discovered that in Hellenistic astrology that they used different versions, different types of cazimi for how close the planet that's on the other side of the sun is to the sun. So like it's being what's the other way of putting it? Blinded by the sun. You know?
Yes. Yeah. Well, and then they talk about this concept of a planet goes away from the sun and it's losing energy, and then it comes back to the sun to be refueled. But I
But
just
then
know
there's a part of it that's supposed to be really, really, really bad too.
Oh, Kazemi?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that one.
So there's different levels of kazemi.
Okay. I just thought of it as, or the way I understood it was an exact conjunction. And I like the word. I never looked it up. I thought it was a positive word, so.
No, it's
Sounds
just
fun.
it's a technical term for that condition when the planet is obscured by the sun.
Okay. Okay. Those are my comments on traditional astrology.
Now, there is going to possibly be the opportunity to have other discussion about this once the show is over, you know, for these shy people, you know.
Off the record.
That's fine.
Right,
I'm
right.
Okay, I have another
Clearly.
question. Maybe it's a numerological thing, but does shamanic astrology ever put emphasis on what the numbers are? Like a 22 is a magical number, or you know, certain. Yeah.
Only with that reference. Yeah,
Okay.
no. And,
So-
there are plenty of shamanic astrologers that love using the Sabian symbols. I did for 25 years.
Oh. But
I use them sometimes, you know, when I'm trying to get in specific things.
Oh, I'm speaking of more, like 22 is the only number that I can think of. That I've heard other astrologers say, if you have something at 22 degrees, it's a royal number. I think that's what it was.
No, we don't.
So
we
you
don't
don't
use.
use
We
any
don't use that.
numerological. Okay.
I do sometimes in the synodic cycles come up with the magic numbers for different planets. You know, like Venus is 5, 8, 13.
Okay.
Mercury is 7, 22.
Okay.
So there's your 22.
There's
There's
the
6
22.
too.
Okay.
And actually, it's really important regarding Mercury. In the Mercury synodic cycle, it takes 22 synods in order to come back to its starting point.
Okay.
And I believe that is very much related to the 22 letters in different alphabets, and the 22 major arcana. It was like 22 loops of Mercury coming back to the starting point. And I have a book that describes how some of the earliest labyrinths were actually the circuits of Mercury. So when you are actually walking the labyrinth, what you're doing is you're energizing all the circuits of the brain. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we'll look for planets at 22 maybe also.
Wow, you can love them at 22
Yeah,
for
yeah.
sure.
I just wondered if any of you, when you do readings, if you would share with someone,
no,
maybe,
so
you've got
I-
a lot of planets at
And
this.
but there's another thing that comes from your question, since you asked about this 29th degree being so horrible, right?
Mhm.
Well, in the shamanic astrology system, 29 degrees of something is not any. It's not almost the next one. You know, it's actually a vital part of that archetype.
Well, vital is exactly the opposite of anoretic, so that
know.
answers that
Right,
question.
right.
No cusp.
Yeah, we don't assume that the planet has lost all its energy.
Right.
It's just limping
Right.
its way to the next sign. That's exactly what that
I mean, if you look at it logically, even astrologers that use all that approach make a huge issue about when a planet ingresses into the next sign.
Yeah.
And so they're completely ignoring cusps when they do that. You know, when it goes into the next sign, it's ingressed into the next sign, you know, oh, we have a new game going on. Well, we agree with that. Yeah. Well then, until the next episode.
Right, so we are complete for this evening. Thank you all for being here.
Live in Tucson, Arizona.